Hey everyone, this is Kevin. So today what me and Paul are going to do is we're going to debate the pros and cons of using geothermal energy. So what geothermal energy is it's energy derived from hot water beneath the surface of the earth. So think of things like geysers and hot springs. Those are places where we might get our geothermal energy from. So what I want to do right now is I'm going to give you 4 reasons why I believe we should use more geothermal energy as an energy resource. The first of which is that geothermal energy power plants release much less emissions than your typical power plant. So it is estimated that the typical geothermal power plant will actually release 1/6 the carbon dioxide of a natural gas power plant and 1/12 the carbon dioxide of a coal-fired power plant. In fact, there are certain types of geothermal power plants that release almost no carbon dioxide whatsoever. In addition, every year geothermal power plants are responsible for the offsetting of about 22 million metric tons of carbon dioxide, 200,000 metric tons of sulfur dioxide, and 110,000 metric tons of particulate matter. All right, the second reason I want to talk about is the availability of geothermal resources. So if you look at this map actually shows the groundwater reservoirs 10 kilometers beneath the Earth's surface in the United States. And so it's color-coded by temperature. And what you should know about geothermal power plants is that they typically rely on bodies of water with temperatures greater than 150 degrees Celsius. So if you look at this legend right here, 150 degrees Celsius is represented by this green. And so when you look at the map, you can tell there's just so many available reservoirs for geothermal energy production. And with the latest technology, it is becoming easier and easier to develop these reservoirs for geothermal power plant development. All right, and another great thing about geothermal power plants is that they are designed to produce energy at all times. So that contrasts with other renewable resources like solar and wind, where it has to be sunny for you to produce energy or windy for you to produce energy. With geothermal power plants, you get to produce energy at all times. And so what that does is that prevents that actually gets rid of that energy drop that you see with other renewable resources, that energy production drop that you get with other renewable resources, where you would actually have to use fossil fuels to compensate for that. All right, so the next reason I want to get into is the efficiency of geothermal power plants. So geothermal power plants use much less energy and water when producing energy. In fact, when we're talking about heating and cooling systems, when geothermal energy is used to power heating and cooling systems, they typically use 30 to 60% less energy, and they use 30% to 60% less energy than a typical system, and they use much less water than a typical thermoelectric plant. So they will use about 0.01 to 0.27 gallons per kilowatt hour produced, versus a typical thermoelectric plant, which can use up to 19 gallons per kilowatt hour produced. All right, the final thing that I want to talk about is the low generation cost of energy. So your typical geothermal power plant, the cost of producing 1 kilowatt hour of geothermal energy will run anywhere between about 4 to 7 cents with tax incentives. Now, without tax incentives, these prices go up to about 8 to 12 cents. Now, this is pretty good because the average cost for coal in the United States was, in 2015, was 10.42 cents per kilowatt hour, with some states having costs that reached beyond 15 cents per kilowatt hour. That's almost double some of the prices that you can get for geothermal energy production. All right, so that's all I have to offer for now. I can't wait to hear what Paula has to say.
Hi guys, I'm Paola and I'm going to be presenting the disadvantages of using geothermal energy. So 3 points I want to make are: first, the environmental concerns that using this kind of energy present; second, the high investment required; and third, how geothermal energy is location-centric. So to begin with the environmental concerns that geothermal energy presents, it requires a constant input an investment of water for the process to continue to work. And this is because some of the underground water is lost every time. And so it requires this constant input of water so the process still works, and so the groundwater that is lost is restored. And so this is not a really sustainable source of energy on its own, because it requires this input of clean water that we might not have in the future as abundant to just use it for an energy process. And additionally, most heat pumps still rely on energy, and to run, they just use geothermal energy to lower the amount of electricity that is used. And most importantly, when these plants and pumps are installed, many substances such as CO2 or silica are released into the surface. So we have this pollution that has been kept underground for a long time. And because of the installation of these heat pumps or geothermal power plants, all this pollution is suddenly released into the surface. And additionally, many processes also might accidentally contaminate the water with toxic surface substances such as some heavy metals. So these are the main environmental concerns that these type of geothermal energy raise. So my second point is that geothermal energy requires a huge upfront investment. So for a power plant, this means for a power plant of 1 megawatt, this means a $2 to $7 million investment, which is huge. And for a home pump, to reduce electricity costs, this means a $3,000 to $10,000 investment. So, and this might be paid back in 10 to 20 years, but it will take a really long time for the energy to repay the upfront investment. So this energy use is not really realistic, seeing as this high investment energy doesn't really yield much benefit back until 10 to 20 years afterwards, which is a really long time to wait, and new types of energy might be created by then. And so my third point is that this geothermal energy is very location centric. So this is basically due at first because this type of energy cannot be transported. It must be used where it is produced. And so there has been some instances like the only way to sort of transport this energy is to transport hot water. And so, as you can imagine, a lot of heat, a lot of energy would be lost throughout this transportation. So it's not really something that we can do right now. But what this also means is that by location-centric, what we also mean is that heat pumps and power plants especially may not be drilled anywhere. And this is because they have a really high chance of causing earthquakes in most sections. So even though a huge part of the area might have the required groundwater resources to be considered for geothermal energy potential, it is not really viable to drill these power plants or pumps because they might cause earthquakes. And so what happens is that the areas where geothermal energy may realistically be used are areas that are not populated, so that earthquakes do not present a risk to the general population. But areas that are not very populated also do not have a high need of energy. And as we said before, geothermal energy may not easily be transported. And so what happens is that geothermal energy for the greater population is not a really viable source of energy right now. So the environmental concerns, the high upfront investment costs, and the location centricity of geothermal energy are the main disadvantages that this type of energy presents.